Hey heroes, welcome to another amazing episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below. For this week's video, we're not strictly looking at the Marvel Universe proper, Earth 616, but rather we'll be exploring two more tales from the Spider-Verse. Roads not taken, timelines where things unfolded differently than the world we know. But before we ask the question, what if, we must first look at what was, with the height of the infamous Clone saga. However, I suppose things truly begin sometime earlier with the death of Gwen Stacy. Peter Parker's first real love, Gwen, was murdered by Spider-Man's arch-nemesis Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who knocked her from the top of the Brooklyn Bridge. The ensuing battle ended in Osborn's apparent death when he inadvertently impaled himself with his own glider. Meanwhile, university professor Miles Warren had developed an unhealthy obsession with Gwen. After her death, he went completely mad, creating for himself the costumed identity of the Jackal. As part of an elaborate revenge scheme, he cloned an exact duplicate of Spider-Man. One with not only the appearance and powers of the wall crawler, but identical memories as well. After the initial encounter between Spider-Man and the clone, the duplicate was initially believed to have been killed. However, the clone survived. He went on the run and took the name Ben Reilly after his aunt and uncle, with Reilly being Aunt May's maiden name. During this time, he clashed with another Spider-Man clone, one whose cellular degeneration had altered his appearance and powers, making him almost unrecognizable. This wayward clone would be known as Kane. Peter remained in New York, operating as Spider-Man and battling many supervillains, one of the most noteworthy of which being the alien symbiote-powered Venom. During this time, Norman's son Harry Osborn took his father's place as the new Green Goblin. While Harry ultimately turned back from his dark path, the toxic effects of the experimental serum he'd used to enhance himself proved to be fatal. Furthermore, Harry left behind an infant son he'd named Normie after his father. Sometime later, after Peter's Aunt May fell ill, the original Spider clone, Ben Reilly, returned to New York and created the costumed identity of the Scarlet Spider. Not only did Kane follow him, but the Jackal returned shortly thereafter via a genetically augmented clone of his own. Thus, the stage was set for the Clone saga to begin in earnest, and what followed was a period of pain, stress, and confusion for both Peter Parker and Ben Reilly. One of the more notable tragedies during this time was the apparent death of their Aunt May. Furthermore, because of the Jackal's trickery, the two Spider-Men suspected that the man calling himself Ben Reilly might actually have been the real Peter Parker, while the one who'd been living his life was the clone. However, the Peter who'd been living in New York was married to Mary Jane Watson Parker, who was pregnant with their first child. And so he decided to hang up his webs and retire with his family. When they found out their baby was going to be a little girl, they decided they would name her after Aunt May. Meanwhile, with a redesigned costume, Ben Reilly continued where Peter left off and became the Sensational Spider-Man. Finally, after a long and arduous series of ordeals, things seemed to be taking a turn for the better. The Jackal was defeated, Peter and MJ were about to become parents, and Kane even made peace with Ben before surrendering to the police. Then came the revelations. It seems that much of what had happened, the confusion, the lies, the pain, had all been orchestrated by one man. Someone who is thought to have been dead for years but was secretly pulling strings from the shadows to make Peter's life a living hell. The original Green Goblin, Norman Osborn. And of all the things he did to make Peter and MJ suffer, Perhaps the worst among them was taking their daughter from them. This was done with the aid of a master con woman named Allison Mongrain. After covertly drugging Mary Jane, Mongrain posed as a nurse and was present in the delivery room, ostensibly to ensure that May was stillborn. However, after leaving the hospital, Allison met with Osborn on the waterfront carrying a mysterious package. He entrusted her to ensure that it was never seen again and provided her with a private yacht and enough money to disappear overseas. Things then culminated when the Green Goblin fought with both Spider-Men. During this battle, Ben Reilly was killed, sacrificing himself to save Peter from being impaled by Osborn's Goblin Glider. Not knowing what had happened to the baby, with his last words, Reilly asked Peter to tell May about her Uncle Ben. Furthermore, when Ben died, his body dissolved into dust, something common among the Jackal's clones, proving once and for all that Peter was the original. Despite all the pain and tragedy, Peter and MJ made attempts to put the past behind them and start moving forward together. As part of this, Mary Jane attended therapy as a way of coping with the loss. However, for a time after this, there was reason to suspect that Allison Mongrain hadn't really killed the baby May Parker, but actually abducted her. When a payment from Osborn hadn't been deposited into her account, she contacted him and reported that their project was progressing happy and healthy. During this time, she was seen with what appeared to be baby toys while speaking with someone or something in a small crib. But then it was shown that those items belonged to her cat, implying that that was who she was speaking with. Later, she was approached by members of an organization called the Cabal of Scryer. The members of this enigmatic brotherhood modeled themselves on a powerful ancient mystic, but during this time, the Scryers acted as agents for Norman Osborn. And in this instance, they were sent to retrieve something valuable that Osborn had entrusted Mongrain with. Allison wanted to accompany them as well, having grown attached to the project, but was forbidden from doing so. Shortly after, the yacht she was on exploded, an attempt from Osborn to tie up loose ends. Mongrain survived and decided to reveal the truth, but was soon pursued by a superhuman known as the Molten Man, who'd been brainwashed by Osborn. In the end, she was fatally injured, but before she died, told Mary Jane that May was alive. Upon learning this, Peter went searching for answers, hoping against hope to find his daughter. But when he finally reached the truth, it wasn't his child who Osborn had taken captive, but his aunt. It turns out the Aunt May who died was actually an actress who'd been genetically altered to look like the real thing and was hired by the Green Goblin to fool Spider-Man. In addition to this, Osborn had recently performed a mystic ceremony called the Gathering of Five in an attempt to make himself even more powerful. However, this actually backfired, and instead of getting stronger, he was driven completely mad. While Osborn was defeated and the elderly May was rescued, in the end it seems that Peter's baby girl really was gone forever. At least in that reality. But what if Allison Mongrain hadn't actually killed the baby and instead stole her from the hospital? What if the package she'd been keeping for Osborn really was Peter and MJ's daughter? What if she was hesitant to hand baby May over to the Scryers because she began to grow attached to her? This is the story of Earth 982, the MC2 Universe, and wasn't the only difference between these realities. Things here really began to diverge while Kane, the wayward spider clone, sought revenge on Osborn for the death of Ben Reilly. During his investigation, he discovered that the Scryers had been paying Mongrain on behalf of Osborn. Tracking her down to confront her, Kane found her knocked out after handing May over to the Scryers. And so it was he who saved Allison Mongrain from the explosion on the yacht. He then questioned her and learned of how she'd stolen the baby and tricked her parents into thinking she was dead. Enraged, Kane knocked Mongrain into the water and left to embark on a new quest. First, he contacted Mary Jane to tell her that the baby was still alive. However, he asked her not to tell Peter until he'd successfully rescued May. Although he was once Spider-Man's mortal enemy, Kane tracked the Scryers to their lair and battled them alone. He ultimately found the child being held by a member of the Cabal named Philippe Desjeunes, and retrieved her by threatening to kill him in front of his own daughter. Unbeknownst to Kane, however, Osborn had already cloned May, infusing the clone with DNA from the Venom symbiote to create a human symbiote hybrid. But the important thing for now is that in this reality, May was reunited with her mother and father unharmed. However, things weren't quite over yet, as Kane still planned on tracking down and murdering Norman Osborn. And despite all the enmity between them, Peter couldn't stand by and let that happen. He found Osborn first, interrupting him in the middle of the Gathering of Five ceremony. This ultimately led to the final confrontation between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. During the battle, Peter's right foot was webbed to the Goblin's hand while he attempted to stop him from throwing a pumpkin bomb. With the two stuck together, the Goblin pressed the detonator on the bomb while it was webbed to his own hand. Whether this was intentional or accidental, we don't know, but Norman Osborn was killed in the blast. Although badly injured himself, Peter survived the explosion, but his right leg did not. Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four began working on a bionic replacement, but Peter elected not to use it, and instead put away his webs to focus on raising his daughter. Of course, he couldn't overcome his desire to help others and started working for the Manhattan Police Department as a civilian scientist. Years passed, and May grew from a baby into a teenager unaware of her father's superhero past. And while he left out the sensitive details, Peter did tell May that she had an Uncle Ben, a hero who died before she was born. She attended Midtown High, the same school as her father, where she became a star basketball player with the nickname Mayday. However, when she was 16 years old, something peculiar happened during one of the games. She suddenly began experiencing a strange tingle that acted like a sixth sense, guiding her around the opponent players. Then Mayday Parker leapt into the air, higher than the basketball net itself, and dunked the ball in. Something a non-powered human should not have been capable of. Peter and Mary Jane were in the crowd, but did not want to believe what they saw. Fortunately, it seems that in the heat of the moment, her feat didn't register as superhuman to the other onlookers. The two parents began to wonder if they were wrong to keep secrets from their daughter. But then, while she was out with her friends, Mayday was attacked by someone wielding a pumpkin bomb. The Green Goblin had returned, but it wasn't Norman Osborn. Nor was it Norman's son Harry, who never returned from death in this reality. No, this was Harry's son Normie, who had reached adulthood and sought revenge for the deaths of his father and grandfather. And so he instructed Mayday to tell her father to meet him on the bridge at midnight. Peter would, of course, know exactly where he meant, the place where all of this started. After she delivered the message, Peter quickly deduced who the new goblin must be. But Mayday also overheard their conversation and learned that her father was Spider-Man. While Peter considered his next move, Mayday confronted her mother. Mary Jane admitted that they shouldn't have kept her in the dark the whole time and told her about her father's exploits. When May asked why there were two different costumes, MJ explained that one of them belonged to her Uncle Ben. Sure enough, that night Peter went to the Brooklyn Bridge, to the spot where Gwen Stacy died. However, the Goblin was disappointed when he saw that Peter was out of costume. Mary Jane arrived and attempted to talk Normie down, but he was determined to have his confrontation with Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Mayday Parker donned her Uncle Ben's costume and web shooters, arriving on the scene to attack Normie herself. Fortunately, she quickly acclimated to the powers she inherited from her father and defeated the new Green Goblin. She changed out of her costume before the police arrived, and Normie was arrested before anyone else witnessed the new Spider-Girl. Peter insisted that she burn the costume after that, but of course this would not be the end. When the Kingpin of Crime sent a teleporting assassin known as Mr. Nobody after her father, Mayday donned a makeshift costume to save his life. After that, she realized that she couldn't stand by and do nothing while she could be using her powers to help people. And so she recreated her costume, based on Ben Reilly's design, to become the spectacular Spider-Girl of Earth 982, eventually changing her moniker to Spider-Woman. Initially, her parents tried to stop her, but Peter realized that such efforts were futile and instead elected to help her realize her full potential. Mayday had several allies throughout her superhero career, notable among them being Dark Devil, the orphaned son of Ben Reilly who possessed some essence of the demon Zarathos and a connection with the ghost of Daredevil. But that's a whole other story. Mayday also had further encounters with Normie Osborn, which culminated in him abducting her and tying her to a chair. Not knowing she had recently lost her powers, on some level Normie hoped that she would break free and kill him, ending the feud between their families. When May refused, Normie exclaimed that he didn't have the strength to kill her or himself, and freed her. Mayday told him that the Parker-Osborn war was indeed over, putting Normie on the path towards redemption and recovery. Although May attempted to continue being Spider-Girl without her abilities, her powers were restored in the middle of a battle with someone claiming to be Spider-Man. As it turns out, this imposter was actually Jerry Drew, the son of the original Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. Time passed, and Peter and MJ later had a second child, Benjamin Richard Parker, or Benji. And despite there now being peace between their families, old schemes from the original Norman Osborn still sometimes reared their ugly heads. For example, a woman named Elaine de Junai, the daughter of the previously mentioned member of the Scryer Cabal, Philippe de Junai, emerged and claimed to be Normie's wife. In truth, the two had been betrothed to one another by Normie's grandfather when they were both only children. Elaine took the villainous identity of Fury, the Goblin Queen, and went on to battle Mayday and her allies multiple times afterwards. Meanwhile, her father, Philippe, discovered May's clone and arranged for Normie to find it. Like with her father, there was confusion about which was the original, but the clone's symbiote hybrid nature was soon discovered, and she took the name Mayhem. During these events, Mayday also had visions of a young blonde woman, a spirit also named May. At the same time, not only was Peter accidentally exposed to Norman Osborn's Goblin Serum, but an organization called the Order of the Goblin implanted him with Osborn's brain patterns in an attempt to resurrect their master. This whole ordeal culminated when the Goblin-possessed Peter bonded with the symbiotic Mayhem and called himself the Goblin God. However, while they were joining, Mayday leapt in as well and wound up inside their combined mind escape alongside the May spirit. And so while Kane and May's allies battled the Goblin God in the physical world, Peter and the two Mays confronted Norman Osborn's psyche from within, during which time Peter saw the spirit as he knew her in life, his loving aunt. Ultimately, the Osborn psyche was destroyed, and its effects were purged from Peter's mind, separating him from Mayhem in the process. Following this, the clone lived with the Parkers for a time, taking the name April and acting as May's cousin. The two even fought crime together, with Mayhem taking the form of a second Spider-Girl. While Peter had reservations about all of this, in the end April sacrificed herself to save May from a fiery death. But now we jump back to the world where May was lost, where Peter and Mary Jane had to move on with their lives together, Earth 616. Now, the passage of time between dimensions is a peculiar thing. Timelines don't always proceed at fixed rates, and so while Mayday was growing into an adult on Earth 982, only a handful of years passed on Earth 616. Eventually, in that world, there was an event which would have consequences for heroes all across the country, the Superhero Civil War, a conflict between Iron Man and Captain America over the controversial Superhuman Registration Act. Initially, Peter sided with Tony's pro-registration side, compelled by his sense of responsibility. And so, at Tony's behest, Spider-Man unmasked himself on live television, confessing to the world that Peter Parker had been Spider-Man ever since he was 15 years old. However, Spider-Man and Iron Man were soon at odds with one another when Peter saw the way Tony had compromised his morals, notably how unregistered heroes were being detained in an extra-dimensional prison in the negative zone. Peter and his family, Mary Jane and Aunt May, went into hiding, but the Kingpin, now knowing his true identity, sent a sniper to assassinate them. With his spider sense, Peter was able to save Mary Jane, pushing her out of the bullet's path, but it then struck Aunt May instead. Peter searched for someone who could save her, but ultimately it was a being who approached him with an offer. The demonic Hell Lord Mephisto. For all intents and purposes, an actual, literal devil, who offers Faustian bargains and has even manifested often in the form of Satan. Mephisto agreed to erase all knowledge of Spider-Man's true identity and to save Aunt May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. In the midst of this, the Hell Lord took several different forms, teasing Peter with the possibilities of potential futures, one of which was a red-headed little girl. In an incredibly controversial turn of events, Peter and MJ agreed to Mephisto's terms, erasing their marriage from their reality and splitting the couple apart. As the spell was cast, the devil mocked them one more time, telling them that the red-headed girl was the daughter they would never have. But what if all of that didn't happen? What if there was a reality where Peter's identity didn't go public, and where he and Mary Jane renewed their vows? Well, it's that world we're looking at next, reality 18119, where the couple had a red-headed daughter named Anna May Parker, or Annie after MJ's Aunt Anna. In this reality, a powerful supervillain named Regent appeared, who even the Avengers were unable to defeat. However, while Earth's mightiest heroes fought a climactic battle against this new threat, Spider-Man's old foe Venom broke into his home and threatened his family. This led to a final battle between Spider-Man and Venom, which spilled into a burning building. With the building evacuated and his wife and daughter's lives on the line, Peter collapsed the entire structure, killing Venom. And after that, Peter gave up being Spider-Man so he could focus on raising his daughter. However, the world was conquered by Regent, who used technology to absorb the powers of captive superheroes. Meanwhile, Annie's powers began developing far earlier than they did for Mayday, and so both Peter and Annie wore power-dampening bracelets he designed to keep them from Regent's notice. But when Annie was 8 years old, supervillains were sent to attack her school in an attempt to capture the superhero siblings, the Power Pack. Fearing that his daughter had been discovered, Peter donned a makeshift costume and joined the fight. He returned as Spider-Man once again, wearing one of his old black costumes, but was captured by Regent. MJ and Annie, meanwhile, were rescued by an underground resistance led by the Avenger Hawkeye. Among their members were Peter's old allies, Hobie Brown, the Prowler, and Bobby Morse, Mockingbird, as well as former enemy Jonathan Owen, the Spot. while the Resistance launched an attack on Regent himself, Mary Jane and Annie followed them into his headquarters to save Peter. Ultimately, it was Annie who used an arrowhead made using Peter's inhibitor technology to depower Regent long enough for him to be defeated. Following that, the Parkers became a crime-fighting spider family, with Mary Jane wearing a suit which Peter made using Regent's technology, allowing MJ to copy his abilities. He was initially hesitant to allow them to join him, but inevitably relented. MJ became known as Spinneret, while Annie took the name Spiderling. Like the other reality we discussed, young Normie Osborn initially wanted to fulfill his family's legacy and claim revenge on Spider-Man, but Spiderling was able to talk him down and the two became friends. Years passed and Annie May grew as a person and a hero, eventually redesigning her costume. When she was 16 years old, she encountered a villain with similar powers to herself, Calicera. Initially, Peter and MJ feared this may have been another clone situation involving Osborn or the Jackal, but it turned out Calicera and other spider-powered villains were created by the X-Men nemesis Mr. Sinister using Annie's DNA. But during this time, Mary Jane took her daughter to visit the grave of the original clone, her uncle, Ben Reilly. MJ told Annie about how Ben could have wanted revenge on Peter for stealing his life, but ultimately he just wanted to be a hero. She also told her daughter about something she hadn't spoken about in a long time. That Annie almost had an older sister. That back then, during all that initial clone nonsense, MJ was pregnant, but unfortunately, they lost the baby. But while Annie and her family fought together on Earth 18119, elsewhere in the multiverse, other spiders fought against other enemies, including an extremely powerful vampiric family called the Inheritors. These beings were so dangerous that spider-powered heroes from a variety of different realities banded together to stand against them. And of course, among this spider army was the Mayday Parker of Earth 982. She was especially motivated to protect her brother Benji after her father fell in battle protecting his family against the Inheritors. These villains were exiled to a barren world at the end of the first War for the Spider-Verse, but when they returned, Mayday joined forces with Anya Corazon, the Spider-Girl of Earth 616, and traveled to Earth 18119, the home of Spiderling and her family. Naturally, the Peter and Mary Jane of that reality were shocked to see a very much alive and grown-up Mayday Parker. At the same time, she was somewhat shaken by the presence of a spider family that didn't include a version of herself. And while Anya and Mayday explained the situation to Peter, Mary Jane quietly slipped away for a few moments. Noticing this, Annie cautiously followed. Remembering what her mother told her about her older sister, Annie asked if her name was also May. Mary Jane simply said yes, and Annie comforted her, hugging her from behind. Of course, she had no idea if the knowledge that May was alive in another world helped or hurt. But Annie, Mayday, and Anya then joined forces in the fight against the Inheritors, but for the full details on that conflict, you can check out the event Spider-Geddon, specifically the tie-in book Spider-Girls. For now, I just want to say that during this conflict, Annie took a moment to tell Mayday that there was a May Parker in her world, or at least there would have been, and that she appreciated knowing what her sister might have been like. The two Parker girls embraced, and Mayday assured Annie that they would always be connected through the web of life and destiny. And that's all I've got for you this week. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more marvelous content. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!